What if the pain you've been carrying wasn't a punishment, but a preparation? What if every sleepless night, every betrayal, every moment you felt invisible, was your unconscious mind collecting data, building something you can't yet see? There's a moment, quiet, invisible, almost unremarkable, when your subconscious awakening begins. And when it does, everything you've been waiting for starts moving toward you. That moment? It might be happening right now. Look, most people are waiting for a dramatic sign. A lightning bolt. A vision. Some grand revelation that tells them the suffering is finally over. But here's what nobody tells you: the end of the suffering cycle almost never announces itself. It arrives like dawn, so gradual you don't notice the darkness lifting until you're already standing in the light. Think about the last time your life changed for the better. Was there a trumpet? Was there a ceremony? No. There was a quiet shift, a decision you made, a thought you stopped believing, a door you finally stopped knocking on. That is the energetic shift. That is the moment your unconscious mind stopped rehearsing your wounds and started engineering your recovery. The Book of Job understood this. After extraordinary loss, after suffering that broke every reasonable expectation of endurance, Job 42 verse 10 says, "The Lord restored Job's fortunes, and gave him twice as much as he had before." Pay attention to that word, restored. Restoration doesn't happen in a moment of chaos. It happens in a moment of surrender. And surrender, as counterintuitive as it sounds, is where your harvest begins. Here's something that might unsettle you, and it should. Your subconscious mind doesn't distinguish between a memory and a present reality. When you relive trauma, your nervous system responds as if it's happening right now. Carl Jung warned us about this when he wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." You're not broken. You're operating on outdated programming. And that distinction changes everything. The reason breaking trauma loops is so difficult is because your unconscious mind believes those loops are keeping you safe. The relationship that hurt you taught your nervous system to anticipate pain, so now it scans every new relationship for danger. The financial collapse that humiliated you convinced your subconscious that abundance is temporary, so now it quietly self-sabotages every opportunity. This isn't weakness. This is the most sophisticated protection system on the planet, running the wrong software. But listen, and this is critical, there comes a threshold. A point at which the subconscious calculates that the cost of maintaining the defense is greater than the risk of healing. Scientists call it neuroplasticity. Spiritual traditions call it grace. Napoleon Hill called it the moment of decision. Whatever you call it, when that threshold breaks, self-healing activation begins automatically. Your only job is to stop interfering with it. The harvest doesn't come to those who suffered the most. It comes to those who finally stopped replanting their pain. Have you ever cried without knowing exactly why? Not the sharp grief of a specific loss, but a deep, oceanic release that seemed to come from somewhere older than memory? That experience has a name in neuroscience: somatic release. And it is one of the clearest signs that your body is completing an emotional cycle it never had permission to finish. Your emotional release is not a breakdown. It is a breakthrough wearing a mask. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, in his landmark work The Body Keeps the Score, demonstrated that trauma isn't stored in thoughts, it's stored in tissue. In muscle tension, in breathing patterns, in the way you hold your shoulders when someone raises their voice. This is why you can intellectually know you're safe and still feel terrified. The mind has already forgiven. The body is still waiting for its permission slip. True inner reprogramming must address both. When emotional release happens, when you allow it without judgment, without rushing to explain or suppress it, something remarkable occurs neurologically. Your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, begins recalibrating. Cortisol drops. Neural pathways associated with the original wound begin to weaken from disuse. And new pathways, ones connected to possibility, to trust, to expansion, begin to strengthen. This is not metaphor. This is measurable biology. And it is the beginning of your psychological rebirth. There's a verse in Isaiah 43 verses 18 to 19 that reads, "Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up, do you not perceive it?" For centuries, theologians interpreted this as spiritual comfort. Today, neuroscientists are essentially publishing the same instruction in academic journals: stop rehearsing what was, because rehearsal strengthens the neural architecture of pain. What the ancient prophets called revelation, modern science calls neuroplasticity. They are pointing at the same door. The Apostle Paul, writing from a prison cell, not metaphorically, but literally in chains, wrote in Philippians 4 verse 11, "I have learned, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content." Notice he didn't say he was born content, or divinely gifted contentment. He said he learned it. This is manifestation alignment in its purest form, not pretending your circumstances are fine, but training your inner state to stop being controlled by them. That's the work. That's the practice. And here is where these two worlds, the spiritual and the scientific, converge most powerfully. Both agree that transformation requires a period of apparent stillness before visible results emerge. The seed underground looks dead. The caterpillar in its chrysalis looks dissolved. The person in the deepest phase of their healing journey often looks, from the outside, like they've given up. They haven't. They're in the most productive phase of their lives, the invisible one. The spiritual harvest is being prepared in the dark. Stop. Ask yourself this: what if the version of you who emerges from this season is so powerful that everything you're suffering right now becomes the best story you'll ever tell? I want to tell you about a man I'll call David. He came to me after losing everything in the same 12-month window: his marriage, his business, and the house he'd spent 11 years building. He sat down and said, almost without emotion, "I don't feel pain anymore. I think I've gone numb." And I told him something that surprised him. I said, "That numbness? That's not the end of your feeling. That's your nervous system calling a timeout. It has processed everything it can process in motion, and now it needs stillness to complete the work." 6 months later, David sent me a message. Something in me finally shifted. He hadn't won the lottery. He hadn't found a new relationship. He had simply woken up one morning and felt, for the first time in years, that the future belonged to him. That is subconscious awakening. That is what it actually looks like. Pay attention to this, because it may be the most practical thing you hear today. Trauma doesn't just wound you once. It installs a pattern, and that pattern recreates the conditions for the same wound, over and over, until you interrupt it consciously. You leave a controlling relationship and find yourself attracted to another controlling partner. You escape financial crisis and within 2 years find yourself back in debt. You swear you'll never repeat your parents' mistakes and catch yourself saying their exact words to your own children. This is not coincidence. This is breaking trauma loops, or rather, the failure to do so. Peter Levine, founder of Somatic Experiencing Therapy, describes unresolved trauma as a kind of incomplete biological response. The body prepared to fight or flee, and then, for whatever reason, couldn't complete the action. So it freezes that energy, stores it, and keeps waiting for a safe moment to finish what it started. This is why sometimes the smallest trigger, a tone of voice, a specific smell, the angle of afternoon light, can collapse you back into a feeling from 20 years ago. Your body isn't being dramatic. It's trying to complete a cycle. The interruption, the actual breaking of these loops, requires 3 elements that most approaches miss simultaneously. First, safety. The nervous system must genuinely experience that it is not in danger. Second, completion. The frozen biological response must be allowed to move, through breath, movement, sound, or conscious emotional processing. Third, reinterpretation. The narrative around the original wound must be updated. Not denied, not minimized, but genuinely reconsidered from your current, more resourceful perspective. When all 3 align, the loop doesn't just pause. It dissolves. Look, there are people who understand this work intellectually and go through every right motion without experiencing any real change. They meditate but remain anxious. They journal but stay stuck. They say affirmations in the mirror and feel vaguely ridiculous. Do you know why? Because an energetic shift cannot be performed. It has to be felt. And the difference between those 2 things is the difference between knowing the word fire and holding your hand above a flame. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "What you are shouts so loudly in my ears I cannot hear what you say." This is as true energetically as it is socially. You cannot vibrate at the frequency of resentment and manifest harmony. You cannot operate from a nervous system calibrated to scarcity and build sustainable abundance. The universe, and everyone in it, responds not to your words but to your actual, embodied state. This is what manifestation alignment truly means, not the vision board, not the affirmation, but the congruence between what you say you want and what your nervous system believes you deserve. The energetic shift announces itself in quiet, almost embarrassing ways. You stop obsessing over someone who hurt you, not because you decided to, but because one day you simply don't. You walk into a room that used to fill you with dread and feel neutral. You make a decision from clarity instead of fear and don't recognize yourself afterward. These are not small things. These are tectonic movements in your internal architecture. They are evidence that your subconscious awakening has crossed a threshold that cannot be uncrossed. The harvest is not coming. The harvest has already begun. Every prophet, every saint, every person history remembers as extraordinary, went through a season that looked, from the outside, like failure. Every single one. Enough philosophy. Let's talk about what this actually looks like on a Tuesday morning when you're tired and nothing has visibly changed yet. Inner reprogramming is not a weekend retreat. It is not a single epiphany. It is a daily, unglamorous commitment to feeding your unconscious mind different data than it received in the past. Napoleon Hill was ruthless about this in Think and Grow Rich. He understood that the subconscious mind is always being programmed. The question is only, by what, and by whom? Here is a practice that neuroscience validates and ancient wisdom confirms. In the final 10 minutes before sleep and the first 10 minutes after waking, your brain is in a theta wave state, the same state accessed in deep meditation and hypnosis. In this state, the critical faculty of the conscious mind is lowered, and direct communication with the subconscious is available. What you feed it in those 20 minutes daily carries exponentially more weight than what you think about during the rest of the day. Use that window deliberately. Not with forced positivity, with directed intention. Specifically, instead of reviewing your problems before sleep, spend that window in deliberate emotional recall of moments when you felt capable, loved, successful, or free. Real memories, not fantasies. The time you handled something difficult. The person who genuinely saw you. The moment something worked. You are not lying to yourself. You are rebalancing the evidence your subconscious uses to calculate what's possible for you. Do this consistently for 30 days, not perfectly, but consistently, and you will experience measurable changes in the decisions that feel natural to you. That is self-healing activation. That is how it works in practice. There was a woman, I'll call her Sarah, who had spent 43 years being the person everyone else needed her to be. Daughter, wife, mother, employee. She was excellent at all of it, and completely invisible inside all of it. She came to me not in crisis, but in something quieter and more dangerous than crisis. She came in resignation. She said, I think this is just who I am. I think I missed my window. I asked her one question. When was the last time you did something, anything, that was entirely, unapologetically for you? She couldn't answer. And the fact that she couldn't answer broke something open. That silence was her emotional release. That question was the beginning of her inner reprogramming. 8 months later, she had changed careers, rebuilt a relationship with herself she hadn't had since childhood, and told me something I'll never forget. I didn't find myself. I finally stopped hiding myself. That is psychological rebirth. Not dramatic. Not overnight. Just real. People hear the word harvest and imagine abundance descending from the sky. But anyone who has ever farmed, literally or metaphorically, knows that harvest is active. It requires showing up to the field. It requires recognizing what's ripe and what still needs time. It requires the discernment to know which fruit serves you and which has gone past its season. The spiritual harvest you've been working toward is the same. It won't be delivered to your couch. It will meet you in the field where you've been doing the work. Galatians 6 verse 9 says, "And let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we will reap, if we do not give up." In due season. Not in your projected timeline. Not according to your 5-year plan. In due season, which means the season when conditions are actually right for maximum yield. The crisis you're in right now may be the very pressure creating the conditions for your harvest. Diamond formation requires enormous pressure. So does the transformation of a human life. What does the harvest actually look like when it arrives? It looks like opportunities that align with who you've become, not who you were. It looks like relationships that feel sustainable rather than electric and exhausting. It looks like a sense of deserving, not arrogance, but a quiet internal knowing that good things are appropriate for your life. It looks like your psychological rebirth expressing itself in every room you walk into. You will carry yourself differently. You will speak differently. And without trying to, without performing anything, you will begin to attract a completely different quality of experience. If you are watching this in a season where nothing is working, hold on. The tree looks most dead the moment before spring arrives. There is a version of you on the other side of this season that you have not yet met. And I want to be honest with you about something. When you do meet them, you will grieve, briefly, for the old version. Not because the old version was better, but because you spent so long believing that version was all you were. Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps and rebuilt meaning from the rubble of unthinkable loss, wrote, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." The psychological rebirth he described wasn't a return to who he was before Auschwitz. It was the emergence of someone the pre-war Viktor Frankl could not have imagined becoming. This is what the end of the suffering cycle actually delivers. Not a return to your previous life with better circumstances, but genuinely new architecture of self, different values, different tolerances, different intuitions. You will find that certain people who once intimidated you simply don't anymore, not because they changed, but because the part of you that needed their approval has dissolved. You will find that problems which once paralyzed you become navigable, not because they're smaller, but because you're larger. This is not personal development language. This is the natural consequence of surviving something that required everything you had. And here is where manifestation alignment reaches its deepest meaning. When your inner world has genuinely been rebuilt, when your nervous system runs on a new program, what you attract is not random. It is resonant. You begin to meet people who are operating from similar depths. You begin to recognize opportunities that your previous self would have been too contracted to see. You begin to experience what mystics called synchronicity and psychologists call selective attention and ordinary people call things just started working out. It's all the same phenomenon, your external world reorganizing around your transformed internal state. I want to close with this, and I need you to hear it not just intellectually but in your body. The harvest does not begin when your circumstances change. The harvest begins when you change, and your circumstances haven't caught up yet. That gap, that delay between internal transformation and external manifestation, is where most people lose faith and collapse back into old patterns. Don't. That gap is the gestation period. That gap is sacred. That gap is where the roots go deep before the fruit appears. Psalm 126 verses 5 to 6 says, "Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them." You have been sowing. Perhaps for years. Perhaps through conditions that should have made sowing impossible. And the promise of this ancient text, validated across cultures, across centuries, across the lived experience of every human being who has ever come through something that should have broken them, is that the harvest comes. Not might come. Comes. So here's your final question, and answer it honestly, privately, right now. Are you willing to stop defining yourself by the length of your suffering, and start defining yourself by the depth of your preparation? Because that shift, that single, private, internal reorientation, is the moment the harvest officially begins. Not tomorrow. Not when the circumstances align. Right now, in this moment, as you decide who you are and what this season has been for. The unconscious mind has already decided you've suffered enough. The only remaining question is whether you will agree. You didn't survive this far by accident. And you won't stop here. The harvest was always yours. You were just being made ready to receive it.